Hello everyone, nice to meet you. Today, welcome to another channel, another series on the influence of mythology on literature. Today we're going to be looking at our final mythology, African mythology. Okay, so mythology has always been a cornerstone of literature and storytelling, as we have seen in the themes that it presents, in its narratives, and in its structure. And it usually passes down from oral traditions, and generations later it is written into epics, and it changes cultures, literary movements, and it's more than an ancient tale, and it's usually a lot more than I think it is credited for. It is in some ways still living, still evolving in the framework, not only in that region but internationally. And so among the vast mythological traditions, African mythology, I think, just really stands out as one of the deepest and most diverse bodies of stories. Obviously, it's hard to really pinpoint what African mythology, quote unquote, is, but it's something around the African region, and we'll be looking into some of the books that were influenced by African mythology. And yeah, just dive into the broad implications that it has. So African mythology, it encompasses like a lot of different oral traditions. While the previous mythologies that we've looked at previously, like Greek or Norse mythology, were very centralized into particular regions and groups, African mythology, they spread across diverse ethnic groups and different regions, and often it was transmitted tribe by tribe, region by region, having its own legends and having its own way of oral storytelling. But there are significant commonalities that bind them together that we can discuss here. Okay, a central theme here, first of all, was the creation and origin stories. So first of all, like all mythology, African mythology attempted to give a reason for why humanity is on Earth, how everything formed, all the supreme like deities that is responsible for all the forming. And so, for example, in the Yoruba mythology, Olodumare is the supreme creator, and the deity of wisdom, and the god that created the world by Amma, a divine force that they believe shaped the universe through a celestial motion. And these myths, diverse in their ways, offer a way for African societies to kind of perceive the existence and the kind of divine intervention idea that a lot of mythologies deal with as well. We also have the role of nature, and we, like all mythology, but I think especially in this case, African myths really try to talk about the elements of nature, and they were talking about human beings and their connection to the environment. So they were looking at suns, rivers, forests, animals, all these different things around them, and they often viewed them as sacred and having a supernatural power. This is often called animism as well. But for example, the Zulus in the south believed in the river goddess Malamambo, and this power was associated with fertility and wisdom. And I think it does reflect on other, just for example, Greek mythological creatures, no creatures, sorry, Greek mythological deities, for example. Yeah, these deities, I think, have something in common in that they try to explain the relationships of human beings and nature itself. We also have destinies and prophecies with African heroes and rulers like the Epic of Sundiata Keita, trying to explain the fate. And this later kind of foretells the rise of Mali's greatest ruler, for example. And these themes kind of underscore, in a lot of ways, the divine will and human existence in all this destiny and prophecy. And in a world of uncertainty, a lot of mythologies, ancient mythologies, dealt with these ideas. And they also had significant ideas of ancestral relationships. And so ancestors had a very sacred place in their mythology. They often believed that the living were influenced by the dead, and they offered and they wanted guidance and protection, wisdom from their ancestors to be passed on to them. They had a deep reverence for ancestry, and this can be shown in literature through characters and different journeys that each hero goes across. And something interesting that I found as I was reading was also the role of tricksters in African literature and folklore, because in a lot of cases there are very mischievous characters in and who happen also to be wisdom givers. So, for example, originating from the Akan mythology, we have Anansi the spider, and this character is very cunning, very has a lot of wit, and these tricksters often play kind of a dual role. They're a trickster, but they're also playing a moral role, and they try to teach a moral lesson that tries to challenge established norms and understandings. Okay, so let's look at some impacts on mythology. I could not. Oh yeah, here I've mentioned the trickster images again of the deities and the ancestors and the communal harmony of life. Yeah, and so instead of bringing you examples of African mythology, because there were so many, I thought it would be great to look at some literature that was, in fact, impacted by mythology itself. And so we're going to be looking at books from the 1900s, obviously very, very modern. We're going to be looking at how mythology has had significant impact even in today's literature. We're going to be looking at the foundation it gives to us in storytelling, in morality, in understanding cultural perspectives of African tribes. Yeah, and so let's look into these different ideas. The first book we have is Achebe's Things Fall Apart, written in 1958. And this book is a very famous book. It is a story that talks about Igbo society and their kind of colonial forces. It uses the Igbo mythology and their oral traditions in order to give us a insight into pre-colonial African life. And so, for example, it talks about Igbo gods such as Ani, the earth goddess, and Chukwu, the supreme god. And these deities continue to influence the societal norms and spiritual life of the Igbo people today. Achibe also describes the roles of oracles, especially the oracles of the hills and the caves, and these oracles serve a divine intermediary kind of force in guiding the decisions of individuals and communities. We also have a significant manifestation of the contrast between mythology and colonialism. And so colonialism is often seen as kind of a disruptive influence on the traditional myths and understanding. It talks about the British and their them kind of causing a loss of mythological traditions and cultural fragmentation in a way for the Igbo people. And so through these books, African literature can just challenges a lot of Western narratives and asserts to us that about the richness and complexity of African culture and storytelling traditions. And yeah, Achieve uses a lot of proverbs, folk tales, and myths to have a depth into his storytelling of the Igbo culture. And a bit more about the author. So Achibe he was born in 1930. He passed away in 2013. He was born in Nigeria during the British colonial rule. So what he was writing about was actually very deeply related to him. And he was able, through famous books like Things Fall Apart, to tell us about African cultures and kind of challenge the Western idea that African is a primitive, even a barbarous kind of country, right? And he's saying no, pre-colonial, even before Western influence came, Africa was a rich country of culture, of cultivation, and they did not require any source of Western intervention. And so Achibe kind of uses African mythology to reinforce the idea in his literature, inspiring writers to talk about their own cultural heritage with pride and nuance. Okay, let's also look at Sundiata's An Epic of Old Mali. So an epic of Old Mali is a oral epic, and Sundiata here is Sundiata Keita, the founder of the Mali Empire, and this was transcribed by Dijbril Tasmir 9, and through his work he tries to preserve oral traditions and history into modern writing that a lot of people internationally can access. And through his work, he tries to bridge the gap between oral traditions that reflect deeply the African mythology of the past and modern ideas where a lot of this has been eradicated. And so through his work, he continues to show us a lot of the mythological roots of African culture. Now, so Sundiata, an old epic, an epic of old Mali, is probably written around after the 13th centuries. We're guessing 14th, 15th century. It talks about Sundiata's birth, and it's all surrounded by a prophecy. He's a legendary hero, and he's kind of a destined ruler. And he has magical elements like a buffalo woman mother and the divine intervention throughout his journey, a lot of supernatural influences in his life. And in these works, the epic celebrates the themes of perseverance, unity, and leadership, and it continues to show us the cultural and historical significance of mythological storytelling. And so this was not necessarily influenced, but this literature definitely has a lot of mythological themes put into it. Yeah, and so a bit more into the historical context, African mythology was primarily a means of, it has been passed down from oral storytelling as a way of preserving myths into writing, and it has a lot about history and spirituality, especially during the colonial time. These myths were suppressed, and now that modern writers are able to voice their voice, especially with the post-independence movement, there are more authors like Achibe and Neon 9 trying to reintegrate African identity into Africans' modern culture. Yeah, I wrote that long. This is African literature, but African mythology has had a significant impact on a variety of ways. Writers like Achibe and Wo Soyinka has been able to draw upon myths and trying to create imaginative ways to interplay myth and literature currently. For example, we have, that is a completely wrong text. I am very, very sorry. But we have modern adaptations, literatures, and films like Okorafor's Akata Witch series, and that tries to blend Nigerian mythology with contemporary storytelling and draws a lot of supernatural elements from African folklore. We also have Marvel's Black Panther, and I think it was 2018, I believe, that the movie came out, and it shows Wakanda. It incorporates African mythology and kind of the ancestral spirits that is rooted in tradition. We also have Tomi Adeyemi's Children of Blood and Bone, which was inspired by the Yoruba mythology, and it continues the themes of oppression and resistance. And through these key works, we can see how new generations are able to engage with heritages. Yeah, and for further resources, I just want to introduce to you some of the ideas of additional resources. So we have Mythology, the Illustrated Mythology of World Myth and Storytelling by C. Scott Littleton, that I personally consulted that I was writing. I also saw that there were good books like African Folktales by Roger D. Abrahams, The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell, and there are online platforms as well, like the African Storybook Initiative and Mythology Unbound, that tries to delve into mythological traditions that have been lost. Yeah, so that was a bit into mythology, African mythology, and its impact on literature. I think it's significant to say that African mythology is very, very rich in its foundation, and it continues to have a variety of influence current day with contemporary and modern adaptations of ancient oral traditions. And yeah, whether it's Sundiata's epics or the works of Achibe like Things Fall Apart, we have fantasy novels, and these myths remain vital in preserving history, educating audiences, and just continuing to inspire future generations to look into these different cultures. And yeah, I think by engaging with these different stories, we can acknowledge the very, very timeless role by which mythology continues to evolve and continues to show us its core values of morality, of justice, of humanity, and of life. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. I think this will probably be the end of our mythology and literature series, and about that I am very, very sad, but yeah, I hope to return with another series. I believe it is going to be looking at the Middle East and their literature, or we may be doing something else. I have various series planned for the literature club, and I'm very excited to share it with you. Remember to stay curious, look into African mythology, check out all the additional sources, and yeah, just continue to learn. And I'm very, very grateful to be able to film this. Yeah, that's it for today. Stay curious, and bye.